Fasting-Mimicking Diet by Valter Longo, Part 2. Today is going to be all about information transfer and education transfer, and I'm going to review some notes that I took from Dr. Valter Longo's presentation from a recent fasting summit that was done online. Everything that I talk about, as a disclaimer, I'm not a medical person. This is just for educational purposes. If you have an actual illness and you're taking prescription meds, obviously work with a professional. This is not advice and all the rest. All right, so today we're going to review specifically what most people do wrong. Secondly, what everyone should be doing for longevity. We're going to review water-only fasting versus the fasting-mimicking diet, or the FMD. We're going to look at the FMD and cancer survival, and we're going to look at the FMD and how it stops inflammation and repairs the body using our own natural stem cells. Pretty cool, right? So when it comes to the first point, what most of us are doing wrong, I touched on this last week, and what most of us are doing wrong is being regular humans in this current food state, in this current food environment where food is available everywhere to many of us. Obviously, this does not apply to everyone, but for the average person, there are very calorie-dense foods that are flavorful and amazing, and we've just habitually become so acquainted to eating this every single day. Perhaps breakfast, lunch, and dinner, plus snacks, plus late night snacking, plus after the bar, plus whatever. And so there's something called calorie poisoning. And many of us, again, not all of us, but many of us are consuming too many calories for what our bodies need. And so we do that over a period of time, and we can run into some serious issues. Now, this is not what we want. This is not to say that we're going to stop eating or we're going to forever diet or anything like that. It's just about tweaking how we relate to food. We're going to tweak our relationship with food so that we're eating things that are more nutrient dense, that are calorie perfect for us. For every single person, it's going to be a customized plan. That's coming in the future. But for now, just know that if you eat a variety of your favorite plants, then you're going to be on a really, really good track. Okay, so that's the good news. This information transfer today that I'm going to give you is going to be full of hope. And I want to say, first of all, that if you're watching this because you are undergoing some sort of really tough diagnosis and just health journey or a health scare, or you're supporting anyone that you love in your life with something like that, I'm just extending my hope for you and your, loved ones' outcomes. I'm just here to say, I'm sorry you have to go through that. And I will also say that my family and I are also going through that right now. So last couple of months have just been atrocious, and we've just spent more time in hospitals and ER rooms than we just ever thought was possible. So it's terrible. It sucks. Nothing good about it. I don't think anybody should have to witness things like this or go through this, but this is a reason why doctors like Valter Longo exist, right? Because he too has seen this, and he and his team are very passionate about helping us manage our chronic illnesses, lessen the side effects of all these amazing modern technologies that may exist, and help us just do things in a more natural way, because there's nothing more powerful than tapping into what already exists within us. And within us, we have all of these amazing systems that are just innate. So if you think like, no, this is not going to work for me, you are wrong. This can work for you. This can work for your loved ones. For the vast majority of people, from so many experts, they say this, all these amazing scientific human clinical trials will show that when we eat optimal nutrition, our bodies can do amazing things. All right, so let's dive into this. Number one, what most of us are doing wrong. Wrongo. So what most of us are doing wrong is eating too many calories. So I'm going to refer to my notes from Valter Longo from this recent fasting summit. And he says that, like in terms of the FMD and who should be doing this for longevity, people with no health conditions, like negative health conditions. He says that the most important thing that we need to focus on is staying young. So he's not necessarily saying like calorie poisoning or too many calories, although he has said that. He says that when, basically if we're eating too many calories for what we need, it's not going to help us stay young, right? So they are telomeres, they're at the end of our chromosomes or our genes. And if they start fraying and deteriorating, we age faster. When we eat well, those telomeres can rebuild and grow. And therefore, when you see certain people starting to eat better, sometimes you see them looking younger, and those are their telomeres in action. It's pretty amazing. But he says staying young and not aging, because as we age, things deteriorate, our organs and all the things. So staying young is the most important thing to focus on. So he's like, basically, when you're 75, things are not working as well as, let's say, when you're 55, and obviously when we're in our 20s. But he is saying that, he says, so I think that it's this ability to basically reset multiple systems and organs and making sure that they are now able to function as they should. So this is the first time in thousands of years of human existence where we eat all the time. So it was already bad in the 20s, like the 1920s, but then it got worse and worse and worse. And now it's ridiculous, with 75% of Americans overweight and obese, and nearly 60% now of Europeans who are also overweight and obese. So this is really a pandemic. Those were his words. And we typically think like Europeans are like so slim and trim and, but unfortunately, the standard American diet are basically just like rich, fatty, delicious foods that we want to eat all the time are not really serving us well. And this is happening on a global scale, right? Even in Asia, there used to be like much lower incidences of all chronic diseases. And now these Western diseases, these diseases of affluence, people with money, people with that ability, is spreading all over the place. So for all of us in the plant-based world, we've heard this from many plant-based experts and professionals, and it's absolutely true. Those numbers are staggering. There's another stat recently that I heard from Simon Hill, and he said 93% of Americans are not metabolically healthy. So our metabolism, our metabolic health is just not working well. Why? Because we're just putting too much stuff. It's just too much. We just need to hit the pause sometimes. So Valter Longo says on the FMD, so far the record has been remarkable. I'm very surprised. I mean, we would have thought that there would be a lot more negative results. And so far, the great majority of the trials have been positive, whether it was cancer, diabetes, pre-diabetes, or inflammatory diseases. He says, moving on to number 2, what everyone should do for #longevity, which is what I want to focus on with my life, one of my core goals, because, I'm not going to say that life is short. I like that quote where, it says, if life is lived well, it's long enough. And that's the name of the game. It's all about enjoying all of our favorite people and doing fun things with them, enriching our lives through love and connection and all those things. But of course, also eating yummy foods. So Valter Longo says that the average person should do the FMD 3 times a year. If you are diabetic or you're obese, you could do it every month for 6 months while you are followed by your doctor. That is of critical importance. It could be fatal if you're taking insulin and you're doing this stuff on your own. So please work with a professional. He says, so that's in year 1 for someone who's diabetic or obese. In year 2, maybe you do it 6 times. So maybe you do it every other month. You have to plan that out with your healthcare professional. And then in year 3, you do it 3 or 4 times. And then for the rest of your life, until you're 65 or 70 years old, you're going to do this, 2-3 times, maybe 4 times a year. He says that we should make small changes to our everyday diet that you can live with for the rest of your life, and then do the FMD. Everyone's plan or protocol needs to be personalized. So even though he says, do it 3 times over a period of 3 months to start, and then every year after that, until you're 65 or 70, you're doing it twice a year if you are a healthy person. That is just a general recommendation from Longo. So I like that he is saying more often these days, it has to be a personalized plan because everybody is a little bit different and we all might be suffering from different disease states, right? He says that the recommendation for how we eat outside of the FMDs is the Mediterranean diet that is heavy into the whole plant foods. Lots of beans, lots of legumes. That's where we're getting the high protein foods, lots of fruits and vegetables. And he says that is combined with the Okinawan diet. So he and his team recommend taking the best from all of the diets around the world that support longevity. They mash it into one recommendation, and he calls that the longevity diet. And I love that. I love that because as a scientist, you should always be testing. You should always accept that everything may change and that there's just so much influx of information. So why not take the best from everything? So by him saying that, I feel like he is not like this egomaniac professional who's like the world longevity expert. He's setting that ego aside and really trying to do what is best for all of us. All right. Water only. Moving on to number 3, water only versus the fasting mimicking diet. Now, I get questions sometimes about water only fasting. I've never done a water only fast yet, but I think I'm probably going to start one this year just to test it out. I'm reading a book by Joel Fuhrman, and I think we'll see. We'll see if he convinces me to see the benefits of a water only fast, because in this book, at least, he says that there is nothing that compares to water only. Maybe he would change his mind if he's really well versed in something like the FMD, but Valter Longo and team have studied water only versus the actual FMD. Some professionals online I will hear kind of diss the FMD because they say this has never been studied in humans. That is not true. He has studied this in humans, and these studies are taking place all over the world. Some of them say wrongly that they would never put, let's say, a cancer patient on a 300 calorie a day diet. The FMD at minimum has 800 calories or 790 calories. So no one said anything about 300 calories. So I think it's so important when we're looking at anything online or hearing anything online to really dig into the actual source, probably multiple sources, and just fact check. But I know that's time consuming and not a lot of people want to do that, right? But water only versus FMD. He says in 2010, they were testing water-only fasting for cancer patients. This was government-funded research for the FMD. At that time, they had been working for many years, which ingredients from plant foods block certain pathways. So he says, I quote, and so we had been working by that time for many years on which ingredients activate the pro-aging pathways, which ingredients activate or block the regenerative pathways, et cetera, the protection pathways. And so the fasting mimicking diet was based on coming up with a formulation that would be viewed by cells and organisms as water only fasting. So they get to eat, but the effect would be very similar to water only fasting. All to say that they did a lot of testing. To date, the person who hosted this fasting summit, Joseph Antoon, he says to date they have invested $36 million into the formulation for the fasting mimicking diet. And now they're testing different versions of the FMD for people specifically with cancer, for people with Alzheimer's, for people with type 2 diabetes, for people with obesity. And I believe this year in 2024, Prolon is going to come out with specific kits for those specific chronic illnesses. So that's really exciting. And again, got to work with your doctor. So he says that on the safety of FMD, basically, the summary is that when it comes to cancer, testing water only versus FMD, they found comparable results, excellent results, which we will dive into in a little more detail because it's fascinating and it offers so much hope for anyone who's in this situation or about to get into this situation, and everybody for preventative measures too. But essentially, water only compared to FMD, very similar results for cancer. When it comes to other illnesses like diabetes, like gut health issue related issues, the FMD was stronger, which kind of blows my mind, but it also makes a lot of sense because the FMD offers nutrients versus water only. There's just nothing going on. Somebody like Joel Fuhrman, I think, would say water only fasting is beneficial and superior because there's something almost magical that happens when the body is completely at rest. And when the body is digesting any kind of food, even juice, it is working. There's a lot of energy that is required to digest food. And so there's something to say about just total abstinence, like a very true monk-like state. And I see, intrinsically, I feel like instinctually that there's a lot of truth to that. But going back to Valter Longo's notes on the safety of the FMD, he says, I quote, "The body during fasting understands having lots of fat broken down. And so fat generally does not interfere with the fasting response. So if only fat is coming in, like through food, that's okay." So he says that the challenge when they were coming up with the FMD is with so many calories to be reasonable for the patient. So the whole FMD started off for the development for cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy. So Valter Longo and team understand the benefits of a fasting state, water only at first. Nobody wanted to do that. So that's why they developed the FMD. So it would be easier on the patient undergoing this tremendous time in their lives. So they tweaked and, again, to date, $36 million of research. That's a lot of money and a lot of time. And they are decreasing insulin, they're decreasing protein, they're decreasing IGF-1 or insulin growth-like factor, because with insulin up, IGF up, the body knows it's not in a fasting state. So the body can intake higher levels of fat, and that's what the FMD is. It is a high-fat fasting food plan, moderate carbs. So Valter Longo wants to be very safe. He doesn't want the insulin to go like 2 down or 2 up. Obviously, up, you're not in a fasting state. And then protein has to be way, way down, he says. All right. So he says, in some cases, again, we did not want to overdo it. So we were okay with the ketone bodies getting to a certain point, but not too high. So when ketone bodies are more than 3, whatever that measurement is, the MMD something, then we can get into trouble. Like there is poisoning that can happen when we have too many ketone bodies in our bloodstream. So again, I like that they're they're just so precise. So with the glucose getting lower to a certain point, but not too low. And the same thing with IGF-1 and the same thing with the ketone body. He says the disadvantages with the water-only fasting, does FMD only offer, this is the question from the interviewer, does FMD only offer fractional benefits compared to water only? So Valter Longo says we publish lots of studies where we compare them. And in some cases, if you look, for example, at cancer, and most of the papers where we compare fasting mimicking diet to water only fasting, they're comparable. But in other cases, for example, in gastrointestinal inflammatory diseases, we saw the fasting mimicking diet beating the water only fasting. And we concluded in that paper, this is an inflammatory bowel disease paper, we concluded that the ingredients, and then he stops. So the fasting mimicking diet, from the time I developed that and my group developed it, we wanted to combine the longevity diet, the nutrients from the longevity zones of the world. Beans, they eat lots of beans, they eat lots of fruits and vegetables, and they eat together. Those are the uncontested pro-longevity food with fasting mimicking. So we wanted to have fasting mimicking properties and then pick all the foods that almost everyone will agree, yeah, this is a good food, like plants, right? Like we know, eat your veggies. And he says, and it's probably going to help people live longer. And that was probably a good idea because, as it turns out, we weren't even thinking about it, to tell you the truth. But it turns out that these ingredients serve the prebiotic feeding the lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, and different bacteria species that are associated with anti-inflammatory effects and improvements in the gut function. Now, why would this surprise anybody? Sometimes we just have to have the obvious stated in order for things to click. And so this is impactful because when we're eating plants that are full of fiber, nutrients are bound to fiber. Some phytochemical experts will say it's not just like a few hundred different phytochemicals on top of vitamins and minerals and healthy carbs and healthy fats and protein that are in every single whole plant food. There's also potentially millions of phytonutrients that we have not yet discovered. So there is a very interesting episode put on by Simon Hill where he's interviewing somebody who's an expert in phytonutrients, and it's hard for someone like me who's not a medical person to completely understand all of that, but it just goes to show there's so much in the world of plant foods that we are not aware of that is beneficial. And we know from people like Dr. Will B., the author of Fiber Fueled, that when we eat every kind of plant, it's feeding good gut bacteria. And that good gut bacteria is going to seep into our bloodstream and spread all over our bodies. Somebody like T. Colin Campbell will say, when we eat nutrients, everything we eat and drink, our body is so intelligently going to take the exact amount needed of whatever nutrient and send it within 2 or 3 seconds to the exact place in our bodies where it's needed the most. So all we got to do is eat the food and then just sit back, because your incredible body within its innate design is going to do the rest. So yeah, as it turns out, these ingredients serve the prebiotic feeding of the lactobacillus and basically the good gut bacteria. So Longo goes on to say, and so in that case, the water-only fasting increased the leakiness in the gut. Interesting. And the fasting-mimicking diet decreased the leakiness of the gut. Fasting-mimicking diet was much more effective than water-only fasting in improving and reversing symptoms of IBD and colitis and Crohn's, especially in the mouse model. I know some people are going to be like, see, mouse model, not in human trials. He didn't say no human trials. He said, especially in the mouse model. When you look and read the book, The Longevity Diet, he first starts off with mouse models because, as a responsible scientist, I've learned that, not that I'm a scientist, but he says that you have to responsibly test it on mice first before you go into human clinical trials. And some people might be really ticked off by that, especially animal activists. And he has a beautiful, if you really want to understand him and that whole thing, on page 120, he has a note to animal activists. And he goes on to say, let's say your family member is suffering from something horrendous. And, brilliant scientists like these dudes have a potential answer. Now, are you going to test that potential amazing solution on your family member and potentially produce terrible results? And he literally says fatal results. Or are you going to test it on a mouse first? So he says on page 121, first, we do as much of our work as possible with cells and microorganisms. Cells, not mice. And then blah, 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 blah. They only do this for very intense disease states. And he says that Valter Longo says that in mice, when they administer chemotherapy, the mice suffer. He literally says, I am troubled by this fact. It seems morally wrong. But I don't see any alternative. Not yet, anyway. So he says that with animal experiments, they should be undertaken only as a precursor to human clinical trials in the treatment of advanced stage and major illnesses. So He doesn't just test on mouse models. This is also seen in human trials. The FMD is not yet FDA regulated. He does believe that that is going to happen in the next few years, but right now, that's just not the case. He also says that there are tens of thousands of doctors' offices that are now using the FMD for their patients because they're seeing extraordinary results. Joseph Antoon, he's an MD, he's a PhD. I believe he works for El Nutra or maybe owns it. He says that the FMD helps to replace old cells with new cells, and that promotes longevity, especially people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's interesting that he said people in their 70s because, many times we hear like, don't do the FMD when you're in your 70s or after 70 years old. Sometimes we hear after 65 years old. So all to say that these are just general guidelines and every single person is going to be unique. So again, work with a professional who is well aware of fasting. If you don't know anybody, if you can't find a doctor, and like, how do you find a doctor who's like really aware of fasting? You can go to createcures.org, which is a foundation that Longo built. Anyway, so the FMD protects lean body mass, our muscle, which is very critical. Fasting is the only method to lose a lot of fat and maintain muscle. This is Joseph Antoon. He says also, when we talk about going back for a second to what we do wrong, what most of us do wrong, we eat late at night. And Joseph Antoon says eating late at night is the worst thing that you can do for your body. We should definitely do intermittent fasting. This is what Valter Longo also recommends. He says that we should fast for 12 to 13 hours every single day. Now, I've always dismissed this, even though I eat a bunch of plants. And in the last 10 years, my health state has been much better than potentially maybe any time in my life, minus when I was like a child. But Valter Longo says, yeah, intermittent fast for 12 to 13 hours every single day. And this only really clicked for me when I heard Joel Fuhrman talk about that. And the way he describes how we should not be going to bed with lots of food in our belly, because then all of the energy is going to be directed to digesting that food, because that's the priority. But if we are not eating too late and stopping our meals at least 4 hours before bedtime, and that dinner can't be super heavy, then our body is then healing at rest. And there's so much that's happening while we're at rest. So it's interesting. Now that's just totally clicked. And if you have watched some of my earlier episodes from this year, then that's the one thing that I've been trying to do, that I've been integrating, because longevity and this preventative game, we're just layering on new habits a little by little. I don't think we should dive right in. It becomes really overwhelming. But what in your chapter right now, what can you layer on that you can sustain every single day? And so for me, that's what it was. It was stop eating by 6 p.m. and by 7 a.m. I'm hungry. I'm ready to eat. But it's not this ravenous hunger where I feel hangry. It's this very controlled hunger where my blood sugar is totally fine. And I feel really good. In those mornings, I actually feel like I feel when I'm doing an FMD. So that's been very interesting. I have been slimming down in the midsection. My strength is super up. And yeah, I really like that. Because we're going through this stressful time right now, I have not been abiding by that rule because, yeah, our schedules are totally out of whack right now. But I do love being mindful of that and going to bed without a super full tummy. It's been working great. So, $36 million into Prolon. So, okay, let's review. People are eating too much. That's what we're doing wrong. What everyone should do is intermittent fasting for 12 to 13 hours a day. I don't even like to label it intermittent fasting because I don't even want to say that I intermittent fast. I just want to phrase it as I don't stuff my face and I don't go to bed super full. I go to bed priming my body to do what it naturally does, to heal not only just the body, but the brain. I sleep better. We are getting better quality sleep. We are sleeping deeper. There's multiple levels of sleep, and we have to hit all of those levels multiple times within a sleep cycle within the night to really just like clear out the brain. And then the same thing is happening within our bodies. And so every single day you are detoxing, like sometimes some of us put too much pressure. I got to do a challenge. I got to do this. I got to do that. Or you can just detox and let your natural body do what it wants to do every single night when we're sleeping. Okay. It's just such a rejuvenating time. I love getting good sleep. It's wonderful. Okay. So number 4 is FMD and cancer survival. It's a hot topic because it sucks. But this is the part where there's so much hope, okay? There's so much hope when it comes to undergoing cancer therapies, preventing it. And I'll just stick to Longo's notes. So in this fasting summit, he says on cancer, the reason we want to do the FMD with cancer and chemotherapy or immunotherapy or whatever traditional therapies is probably pretty important. So if you think of a cancer, it is developed. It is started, let's say, from a mutation and developed from that mutation in the presence of lots of food. And the great majority of people, as we say, eat so much. And so in the evolution of a cancer, it always has had excess of everything. Lots of glucose, lots of sugar, lots of amino acids, lots of proteins. And when that's taken away, we now very clearly show over and over and over, the cancer goes into an emergency mode. And people have this illusion that fasting can cure cancer. Well, I really don't see that. When we see fasting and fasting mimicking diet do is put the cancer in an emergency mode. But the very important thing is when it gets into these emergency mode, it tends to rely on very few systems and pathways that we call pathways. So there is now very few genes that they are keeping. They're essential to keep that cancer cell alive. Now the drugs come in and they can do a very good job of blocking those. And so we've shown that for hormone therapy, for chemotherapy, for immunotherapy. So when we combine it now, all of a sudden this joining of forces meaning like that traditional methodology of chemo or immunotherapy with the FMD, he says, is extremely effective in the mouse. And now we're starting to see the data in humans are very much in agreement with that in mice. And it makes sense, right? Because unlike most therapies, there is just a fundamental reason why they should work. Provided we can match the fasting response in the mouse, it's extremely unlikely that all of a sudden it's going to stop working in humans. Now, I've heard other professionals say that in mouse studies, when you test the same thing on humans, you often get a different result. But it's a little bit confusing for like the layperson, because you'll say that in one statement, but then in another statement, you're referring to all these mouse studies because these mouse studies offer all these great hints that could be then applied to humans. In the book, Longo refers a lot to the results of their mouse studies and then follows that up with the results of the human studies. And there are so many similarities. So, so he goes on to say it may not work in all cases, like in all human cases, but it's going to be a matter of finding how to revolutionize the environment of a patient so that the cancer cell, no matter which cancer cell it is, in terms of what type of specific cancer, that it struggles. And then with the standard care of drugs, together with the standard care of drugs, then you can kill them all. Kill all the cancer cells. He says that. Kill all the cancer cells. And so we see the fasting mimicking diet maybe putting at least, in the early stages of putting the cancer and the cancer treatment in the category of antibiotics. So he says it's still years away in terms of having like a solid, very confident response. But he says, I quote, but at least there's that potential. There's high potential. He says that in this book on page 122, He says starved cancer cells, like when you're in a fasting state, are most vulnerable to the assault of chemotherapy after fasting. So he literally calls it a magic shield. When we're in a fasting state, there is some sort of magic shield that surrounds our normal cells. But the cancer cells, they disobey. They're just like wily little effers, and they disobey. So they do not create this magic shield. But that's a good thing if we're going into something like a chemotherapy, because then chemotherapy comes in, it kills most, not all, of those cancer cells, and those healthier cells have that magic shield. So then you're done the chemotherapy, you come out of it. He says you wait at least a day or two to start rebuilding your food plan and eating slowly, solid foods. And then you minimize your side effects and you recover faster. So more cancer cells being killed, more healthy cells being protected, less side effects, less atrocities onto that patient. I mean, this is all very, very, very good news. On page 124, he says that permanent therapeutic effects are achieved only through the combination of fasting and chemotherapy. So when he said earlier, people think that fasting is going to cure cancer, and he says, I really don't think that. That's what he means. Fasting alone, he doesn't believe is going to help, cure, reverse, maybe manage. He says it has to be done in combination with fasting and chemotherapy. In mouse studies, we saw fasting combined with chemotherapy definitely cured cancer, even in the disease's end stages, after it had metastasized. He says not all mice were cured, but we and others regularly obtained a 20 to 60% cure rate for a variety of cancers. So much hope. So much hope. Okay, so if you add the fasting mimicking diet now, that never happens in terms of the cancers starting to grow. And the cancer goes down, down, down until you see cancer-free survival. That's why he says the potential is so high for humans. Those were his literal words. The potential is so high for humans. It's just a question of how do you affect that for each individual person and their specific cancer. So he says, this differential stress resistance, that's the magic shield, is really key, because if you think about maybe all treatments right now, besides a few innovative ones that are very futuristic, but all treatment with this chemotherapy or hormone therapy or immunotherapy even is going after all the cells. This is why there's a lot of side effects, especially from immunotherapy. So that magic shield is so important. So in normal cells, they know what to do. They shield, they slow down growth, they stand by and they protect, they become protected. The cancer cells, different degrees. So different degrees of listening to whether or not to adopt the magic shield or not. In most cases, they disobey. And we know this, right? Like cancer cells, they're insane. And this is the definition of a cancer cell: disobedience from anti-growth signals. And probably fasting and fasting mimicking diet are the biggest anti-growth signal, but they don't care. And that's exactly where we want them. So that's how we think that the chemo, etc., hurts them. It's amazing. So maybe, last week I was pretty much stressing, and I will stress again, if you are on prescription medications, if you're suffering from any kind of, chronic disease state, that you should not be doing even the official FMD kit alone, right? Like obviously you've got to be working with your professionals. You probably are. You need to be talking to your oncologist. Maybe your oncologist is telling you, like many of them unfortunately say, like just eat whatever you want. It doesn't matter what you eat all the hot dogs and eat all the things, because they just want you to put on weight. The intention is good, but we know, right? A hot dog is a highly processed food. And whatever you think about the World Health Organization, you go there and you see that this is a class A or a class 1 carcinogen, right? The salamis, the hot dogs. Don't eat that. Don't eat that. Oh my gosh. Eat whole plants. That's our safest bet. But let's say your oncologist has no idea. You want to do this. You want to do the FMD. But you want to find somebody who is familiar with this. You can go to Create Cures Foundation. This is a clinic that follows thousands of patients. Longo says that 50% of them are cancer patients, and he encourages us to contact the clinic. His words are they've seen remarkable results. Remarkable results. The website is createcures.org. So I think for people who can't afford it or can't find a specific doctor, like just go there. If you are a physician and you want to learn more about this, there is a total huge section on that website for physicians in particular. Okay, so all to say that there is a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope. Maybe there's not a lot of hope. Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of hope. I'm just going to say that there is hope. It's not a hopeless journey. There is hope. And so maybe not fasting is like the only thing that we can do, but it's at least one modality that you can look into and that you can dive into and that you can try. And the FMD kit, this year, if they do come out and release one that is specifically for cancer, that's great. Now, the FMD is not FDA approved, like I've said, but Longo specifically says, let's say that you are undergoing chemo or you've got a diagnosis of whatever cancer, and they've tested it on all the hormonal cancers, on colon cancers, but as well as pancreas cancers. So that's really interesting. He says that, let's say you can't wait for years and years for the FDA to approve it, and you just want to give it a try. That may sound dangerous to some, but amazing to others. For me, I think that sounds amazing. Like, yeah, let me just try this. Then he says, that's why he's created the Create Cures Foundation, because he understands that some of us cannot wait. We do not want to wait. We can't wait for years and years. So a note for those undergoing cancer, or those of us who want to minimize our chances of developing, or we want to delay the onslaught of it hurting us. On page 135, he has below our dietary recommendations for people at high risk for cancer. So number 1, follow the longevity diet with protein intake reduced to the lower range of about 0.31 grams per pound of body weight per day. This is a hot topic because just everyone's like, how much protein should I get? He says 0.31 grams per pound of body weight. So that's the protein intake. Longo is a low protein dude. 0.31 grams per body weight pound. How are you going to find that out? You're going to go to a Chronometer and you're going to input whatever you eat and just get a gauge of how much protein you're getting every single day. Number 2, limit fish intake to 1 or 2 times a week. Otherwise, stick to plant-based foods. I think, and I have heard him say, like, he would recommend people eat a bunch of whole plants, maybe exclusively. He does believe in the medicinal benefits of lots and lots of olive oil. It could be because he's Mediterranean himself, but it is also a processed food. So just keep that in mind. I think to be the safest, we're going to always or almost exclusively focus on whole plants. I've heard him say that by recommending fish, like he says to limit it. So anytime I hear like limit this, limit that, well, then ideally just don't have it at all, right? But the reason why he allows for it is because he wants us to be approachable. And so he knows that following a very strict whole foods only, whole plants only, this is a vegan, very strict, optimal level of eating. He knows that most of us, we're just not going to adhere to that because we love to eat. And those things are tasty. Number 3, reduce sugars to very low levels. Also minimize the consumption of pasta and breads. It is important to keep blood sugar levels as low as possible within the safe range. He didn't say eliminate all pastas and breads. He says reduce it. But again, if you want optimal, and you've got that strength, then maybe you're going to eliminate all processed foods. Number 4, maintain a healthy weight and BMI. Number 5, exercise regularly. Move your body. He doesn't mean like go pump or go do a HIIT workout. He describes exercising regularly as moving your body for at least 20 or 30 minutes every single day. So what he does is after lunch, I believe, he gets his afternoon coffee or tea and he walks to a cafe when he's living in LA. And so it takes about 20 to 30 minutes, or no, it's like about a 15-minute walk. And so there and back, there's this leisurely stroll. I think we need to sweat a little bit every day. It's really important also to build muscle, especially in our legs, which acts as like a secondary pump, pumps our blood back up, all the things. Good for our neurology too. Number 6, page 136, undergo a 5-day FMD every 1 to 3 months, depending on your weight and health status. Once every 3 to 6 months if you are very healthy with ideal weight and abdominal fat. Once every month if you are overweight or obese and at high risk for cancer. Remember that in mouse studies, FMD was as effective as chemotherapy against cancer. Mouse models. Human models, remarkable results is what they have seen. Instead of damaging normal tissues and organs, it protected them. Number 7, nourish yourself with essential fatty acids. In brackets, he says omega-3 and omega-6. Vitamins and minerals from a variety of vegetables like broccoli, carrots, green peppers, tomatoes, garbanzo beans, lentils, peas, black beans, etc. You name any whole plant that grows out of the ground and is edible to humans, and that's your optimal food. And fish, salmon, anchovies. So salmon, great omega-3s and 6s. Anchovies, very low on the food scale, right? Small fish. Small fish means less mercury and all those heavy metals. He says your immune system is one of the major defenses against cancer. 70% of our immune system relies in our gut health. The diet must be balanced to kill cancerous or precancerous cells without causing deficiencies in your immune system or hormonal changes that can make you frail. See the high nourishment diet examples at the end of this book. Basically a bunch of plants. Number 8, discuss with your oncologist the option of taking 6 grams of vitamin C or ester C daily for a few weeks every 6 months. He says this is controversial, but he says if you just take it for a few weeks every 6 months, not every single day, not massive doses of it, not for years and years and years, just minimally, this is maybe like a precautionary thing. Number 9, consume plenty of good fats from olive oil, nuts, and fish, but minimize saturated fats, even those that are vegetable derived. So when it comes to good fats and omega-3s, instead of supplementing, you can just get them from walnuts. Input a handful of walnuts. If you really want to weigh it, handful of walnuts, input that into Chronometer and look at the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids that come from simple walnuts. Good for brain health, and you're getting all of your essential fats. So instead of a supplement, which I'm going to link in the description, this amazing video that Gil Carvalho, he's a medical doctor and a researcher, he just did an amazing video about supplements. And if you really dive into the supplement industry, how none of them are FDA approved, how they might take a study of one component and blow that up and say our supplement contains that one component, but it can also contain a whole other slew of things. And they didn't test everything together. They tested that one supplement or that one nutrient. They tested a lot of supplements and it showed that it didn't even sometimes have the nutrient that we're trying to buy. It didn't have the right amounts. Sometimes it had way more. More is not always better. Sometimes that's really dangerous, especially when it comes to something like cancer. So I say just like, again, it's like a broken record. I'm a broken record. Just eat the whole plant. Eat the whole plant, ideally. He says minimize saturated fats, especially those that are vegetable derived. Now, coconuts are really the only vegetable in the plant kingdom that have a very high amount of saturated fat. So that includes coconut oil, coconut butter, coconut yogurt, coconuts. That doesn't say like never eat coconuts, but like maybe you're going to have a rich, beautiful coconut curry like once a year, once a quarter. If you have cancer, just don't do that. Just do like a cashew cream. It's just as rich and delicious. Number 10, consume as little alcohol as possible. Duh. So that's that. Moving on to the last point. FMD and stopping inflammation and repairing the body with our natural stem cells. So, for the past 120 years, the aging field has focused on the calorie restriction part. When we eat less calories over our lifetimes, we tend to live longer and better. Autophagy, this is something that I touched on last week. Autophagy, a lot of people are like, I gotta fast because I've got to trigger autophagy, and autophagy kills and recycles damaged cells and damaged cell parts. I will link another video also from Gail Carvalho interviewing a scientist about autophagy. Autophagy also happens when we are exercising. It's not just about fasting. Too much autophagy is not a good thing. It can be actually terrible, especially when it comes to cancer. So again, just more is not always better. And autophagy is a really dense subject that is apparently relatively new in the medical and science field. So it's not just about autophagy. However, it's a big benefit. So he says autophagy and lots of killing of damaged cells, as we've shown for cancer cells. But then the re-expansion is an opportunity, to reprogram. So re-expansion means after we break our fast and we start re-expanding our organs. During the fast, our organs are literally shrinking. Those damaged cell parts are being eaten, and so cells are lessening. And then once we break our fast and we start to eat again, our organs are regenerating, re-expanding. We're rebuilding a large percentage of our immune system. Our gut health is changing. So much is happening. Okay, so he says, when 420, everything is functioning, and in most cases, the fat is limited to, let's say, less than 20% of body fat, or body composition is fat. This may not be the case nowadays, but let's just say. So I think, this is Longo, as long as we go back to the function, I mean, the best way to do it, obviously, is to go back to returning the multiple systems to be as young as possible, and at the same time, reducing the fat back to a normal level. And obviously, there is no better way than the fasting-mimicking diet. And the reason is that it uses what I call 3 billion years of research and development to fix the problem, rather than try to interfere or activate GLP-1, et cetera, et cetera. GLP-1, Ozempic, all these weight loss drugs. One way to do it, lots of side effects. Just Google it. The side effects are insane. When we're on the topic of cancer, one of the side effects says thyroid cancer. So no, thank you. Instead, GLP-1, actually, I learned that GLP-1 triggers something that our guts will naturally create when we eat a lot of fiber. Fiber is only present in whole plant foods. So we can naturally get this in our bodies by just eating the food. He says, I think the FDA system is great, but at the same time, it's short term. It's just looking at, okay, let me solve a problem for 3 months, 6 months, a year. And fine, you can solve a problem for a year, but I think we look at it from, how can I make you live to 110 healthy? And that's a much, much more difficult problem to solve, right? So short term, you can solve things in a lot of ways. Some are good and some are bad, and some are really bad. But long term, it just really takes a lot of aspects to make somebody to live to 110 and healthy, right? I'm not trying to live to 110, but I'm just trying to live a good life free from pain and the ability to just do whatever the F I want to do, and to support my family, to support my friends, to support our daughter. I want to be a healthy, strong grandma. By then, I will know how to do a handstand. But I want to be a really effective grandma and be able to help our daughter and her kids, should she choose to have them, and just continue to do what I love to do. Travel, eat, work, all the things. So Longo. So when you intervene with the fasting mimicking diet and refeeding, it looks like there's so much more functionality improvement and reduction of risk factors. And now soon enough, we will be published on Biological Age. He says there are 15,000 clinics using the FMD right now. The medical community is really excited about this over the last 7 to 8 years about fasting. So that is very, very interesting when it comes to fasting. especially since I know a lot of you want to do the DIY. Even though last week I was like, don't do the DIY if you have a chronic illness and all the things. When I really think about that, there's just so many different examples of people who maybe you've done Prolon many times and you're kind of sick of it, and that's why you're looking for a DIY version. Great reason to do a DIY. Maybe you are working closely with your doctor and your oncologist, and you've done the Prolon, and again, now you're ready to manage your cancer. We can live with cancerous cells. We just don't want them to fester and grow and take over and shut down certain organs, right? So all of us may have cancerous cells, and that may be totally fine, but we just want to keep that environment under control. So maybe in that case, you want to do a DIY. Another good reason to do it, right? Maybe you can't afford it, right? Like I feel like I kind of dismissed a lot of people who just can't afford it, because I do hear from people who say they can't afford our DIY package. And so if that's the case for you, then, write to us, hello@plant52.com. We will help you out. But on page 114, even though Longo says do not do a DIY, he kind of gives us a guideline of how to do a DIY. All right. So he says preparation. For at least 1 week before doing the FMD, we recommend following the longevity diet. So again, just eat a lot of plants. Eat a lot of plants. I know many of us think like, oh, what about chicken? Chicken is really healthy. No. Eat a lot of plants. Minimize the chicken, or just don't include it. He says with 0.36 grams of protein per pound of body weight. In the recent fasting summit, he said 0.31 grams. So just around that range. Preferably obtained from vegetables and fish. Multivitamin supplements of omega-3 should be taken at least twice during this preparatory week. Instead of a supplement, right, unless you really know that supplement industry or that company that's producing that particular supplement, you probably don't. Just stick with like walnuts, okay? So he says FMD. So he's got a chart that shows exactly how you can break this down. And he does say work with a doctor to produce this. In my experience, and from what I read and from what I hear, so many doctors have no knowledge about food. So if you do have a doctor who does know about food, then amazing. Day 1, 1,100 calories. 500 calories are going to come from complex carbohydrates, so vegetables such as broccoli, tomatoes, carrots, pumpkins, mushrooms, etc. 500 calories are going to come from healthy fats, nuts, and olive oil. You can also do avocado. That's what we have in our DIY plan. 1 multivitamin and mineral supplement, because he wants you to be safe and he wants you to have all of your nutrition intact. 1 omega-3, omega-6 supplement. Again, walnuts. Sugarless tea, up to 3 to 4 cups per day. Sugarless and caffeine-free. 25 grams of plant-based protein, mainly from nuts. I will tell you, there is protein in every single whole plant food. So you're going to get less than 25 grams. Get less than 25 grams. The FMD is a low protein food diet, and then unlimited water. From days 2 to 5, so 2, 3, 4, and 5, 800 calories. 400 of those calories are going to come from complex carbohydrates. Just do a repeat of day 1. Vegetables such as broccoli, tomatoes, carrots, pumpkins, mushrooms, etc. 400 calories from healthy fats. 1 multivitamin and mineral supplement. 1 omega-3, omega-6. Basically, it's the exact same thing, but just less calories. The above components can be divided between breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or they can be taken as 2 meals and a snack. Day 6 is a transition diet. For 24 hours following the end of the 5-day FMD, patients should follow a diet based on complex carbohydrates, vegetables, cereals, pasta, rice, bread, fruit, and minimize the consumption of fish, meat, saturated fats, pastries, cheeses, milk, etc. So all to say, maximize whole plant foods. A little bit of pasta, a little bit of rice is okay. But when you ask Longo when he eats pasta, because he's Italian, what does his pasta look like? He has very little pasta, and it's filled with beans or chickpeas and tons of veg, and then lots of olive oil. So it sounds like he kind of eats like a high-fat diet. But next week, I'm going to review what he eats in a day, because next week our focus is going to be on refeeding and breaking our fast. Now, even though in this book he says day 6 is the transition day, in the online summit, because now he's got all these new data points from these human clinical trials, he says that our refeeding window is at least a month. He says that, at least a month. So minimize fish, meat, saturated fats, pastries, lots of butter and pastries, cheeses, milk, basically animals, things from animals. We're going to minimize that stuff. Okay. We're going to conclude with, he says, from the Fasting Summit, just because you fast, it doesn't mean it's magic and it's going to work no matter what. Okay. It's not just the fasting. There's the fasting and there's the refeeding. There are some ways to fast, and that fasting has to be personalized. In most cases, there should be a healthcare professional guiding that. And if it's done correctly, I think that the effects can be tremendous. Most of it seems to have to do with the ability of these periods of fasting to clean up and use lots of damaged components. But maybe even more important than the cleanup is the regeneration part. The regeneration part, which is what we're going to dive into next week. Okay, so what did we learn? Let's review. Wrong, we eat too many calories. Don't need as many calories as we think. Number 2, everyone should be doing the 12 to 13 hours resting period. Go to bed, not on a full stomach. We're going to let the body heal. Every single day, we're going to undergo a massive healing process. And then if you want to do the FMD, you're doing the FMD and you're kickstarting so many things. But every day, that's something we can do in terms of healing. Number 3, water only versus FMD. If you want to do a water only fast, be my guest. But from Longo's perspective, maybe as good as the FMD, maybe not as good for gut-related issues. And then cancer survival, all that good stuff. Work with a doctor, FMD, stop inflammation, and kick up those stem cells. Stem cell therapies can be like tens of thousands of dollars, but in the FMD, if you look at Longo's very popular TED Talk, he shows this one graph that shows like our usual stem cells. After the FMD, it's like 3 times the amount of what we normally have. And stem cells are amazing. We're going to get into that next week because stem cells go to work once we start refeeding or eating again. All right. So there is hope. There's hope. There's so much that we can do, not only for prevention, but if we're just in the thick of things right now. So if you are, I wish you lots of hope and good energy and love and support and all the good things. All right. So with that, I'll see you next week. Have a good week.